Let's entitle this segment just about truth, because it's one of the things that it seems to be we're at a want for in information, in news, and what's going on around us in life that's driving us all nuts. I've been contacted in response to our ministry online by people who are wondering what's going on, and my only response is finally the inmates are in charge of the asylum. You and I are left to wonder at what's true and draw our own conclusions about truth. If it has to do with COVID-19, by all accounts, we can't trust the reporting on actually how many people are testing positive, because there are facilities that are actually admitting that the only reports that they're submitting are positive. 300 facilities in Florida have admitted that they've reported 100% positive tests. They're not reporting negative tests. And when challenged at that point, we discover that the positive tests are reported 10 times higher than they actually are. So truth is in short supply across the board in the issues of social injustice. There's a want for truth there. So one of the challenges is, how do you go about finding truth? What is truth? How do you know what actually is true? And so I've been thinking about this for a while in our journey together, because of what God has called me to, what I've been doing for so long, and what I'm trying to do now with you is to figure out, what are those issues that are relevant to us. One of our viewers, a longtime friend that we've talked about before, has requested that he hopes that I spend some time talking about things that I've learned in my journey in dealing with transitional churches. That in itself is an issue about truth, because one of the challenges that we were met with in talking with churches or church people is quite often they really don't want to know the truth. They're like a neighbor that we had there in Maryland who had a sizable growth in his private parts. And he refused to go to the doctor because he didn't want to know what was true. So I thought this would be a good subject matter to delve into, because we can talk about the issues of truth in respect to you and to me, and what's important and how we go about determining those things. And then we'll try to distill that down into the implications for individuals, or for, even for churches. And we're going to take a little bit different tack today on how we're presenting this information, because we have several different passages that we're going to read from. You saw the one in 2 Corinthians 13 that we will cycle back around to at the conclusion of this. And so rather than me putting the text up on the screen, then I will simply give you the text. Then you can pause the video at that point in time. You can go and read in whatever version or translation you choose, taking however long you need to. Come back and start the video, and we will resume our conversation about that particular passage in the context of truth. Some of you know this because if you've been doing Bible study, attending church, Sunday school, vacation Bible school, small group, whatever it is, you may have some idea about how often the word truth or true actually occurs in Scripture. Now, I didn't go back and look up the total count, but there were certain passages, and this is the one that I wanted to start with to get into the process. And I wanted to look at passages that were specifically addressed to the issue or the question about truth, and help us sort of understand our managing the issue of what that means and the implications for us. So get your Bible and get prepared to go into the first text, because there are three things about truth that are important in our journey together that should be a benefit to one and all. The first is that there are motivations for truth. The first text I want you to look up is the Gospel of John, the fourth Gospel, John chapter 18, verses 1 through 38. So pause the video, go and read that for yourself, and then unpause it, and we will resume our conversation. This has to be among the top, I'm going to say three, because we're going to look at all three of these passages in the Gospels, especially in the life and the ministry of Jesus, where the word truth comes up, and it's put in the form of a question, which is where we really ought to begin. In the larger context here, we know that this is the scene after what Jesus has been arrested. He's being brought up on charges, and he eventually will be led off to the cross and crucified. But it's in this framework that we have a lot of things that are taking place up to we get to the verse in question, where the central character here next to Jesus is the one in charge, who's calling the shots, who can make the decision as to whether Jesus is to be crucified or not. And he asks the question, what is truth? But a lot goes into this before we get to that. So let's back up and at the beginning of the chapter, and you've just read this, but there are actually like 5 different things, and 2 of them are repeated. So it's actually 6 times, but 5 separate things where the issue of truth is at play here. The first of these is that you have one of the disciples, who was the treasurer of all things, who found it more important to sell Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver than to continue to believe in him. Judas betrayed Jesus for personal reasons when it came to understanding what was true and not true. It would be easy for us to interpret or to assume that obviously Judas did not really believe that Jesus was the Messiah. So for him, the truth was that Jesus had been lying. He had been deceiving the crowds. He had been deceiving the people. He had been deceiving the disciples, and Judas would have none of that. And Judas sold Jesus out over the issue of what he thought was true and not true. And then right after that, because all the disciples fled, they ran off from the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus was arrested and he was taken away, but Peter sort of lurked in the shadows and kept close, decided to see what was going on until somebody put their finger on him and said, "Aren't you one of his disciples?" And so you actually have 2 different occasions here separated by another event in which Peter is struggling with the whole issue of truth. In this case, he's wanting to say he believes that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, but he was unwilling to what? Admit to the truth. He was unwilling to say, yes, I am one of his. And so his motivation for truth was, again, it was a motivation. While Judas's was a personal gain, Peter's was a motivation of personal what? Protection. He didn't want to run the risk of going through what Jesus was going through. Then you have Jesus being brought before the sort of the religious authorities, and you have the first character here of Annas, who was a high priest, and we can't go into the storyline here because high priests serve for the period of the year, and quite often the office was bought or paid for, or some sort of corruption to get it. And so Annas and Caiaphas, who are the 2 players in these next 2 sets, Annas, he interrogates Jesus. Not because he's looking for the truth, but he's looking for some political leverage. And so for him, he doesn't ask questions about what is true. He's not looking to determine what is true. He's looking for a cause to have Jesus done away with, because Jesus poses a political threat to him and his office. And when he's done with that, he hands him over to what his, a relative by marriage, Caiaphas, who is the functioning high priest under those circumstances. And Caiaphas takes Jesus and puts him through this kangaroo court of a trial. And they ask questions, but it's never questions intended to get at the truth. They start with their conclusions, and they're trying to build a case to those conclusions. And so truth very much is on the scaffold, and something else is very much on the throne. And so Caiaphas is motivated, by political reasons, by his position in the community, by his relationship with the Roman government, and with the governor there. He's trying to continue to advance his own causes. So his was both political and then personal. And then finally, when the religious establishment has had their say with Jesus, they've abused him, they've done what they want to do, then they bring him before Pilate, and Pilate, you want to say God bless him, he didn't want to know what the truth was, and yet he's the one who asked that question. He has this religious establishment which represents a majority of his population that he's responsible for. He's trying to maintain peace, good rapport with them. Jesus is brought to him, and he asked Jesus a series of questions because it's like he's trying to figure out what he needs to do or what he should do or what he ought to do or what he can do. And it may just have been out of frustration that he framed the most relevant question at all. And he asked Jesus, who answered some of his questions, he asked him the question, well, what is truth? And I don't know how you read this, but I can't come to any other conclusions than the fact that the motivation about the issue for truth for Pilate, it was personal, it was political, but the question was it actually philosophical? Did he want to know what truth was? Which raises the issue, what in fact is truth? And, you can look at definitions. For me, I've looked at several of those, and the best short-term definition I can come up with for truth is reality. Truth is reality. Some want to put it in the framework and say truth are facts. That would be the same thing. But truth is reality. Pilate knew what he saw. He knew what he heard. He didn't know. He hasn't been trained or brought up in a context to be expectant of a Messiah. He wasn't Jewish in nature. He was a political character, an extension of the Roman Empire there, and yet he poses this question about truth in this pivotal moment, the most pivotal moment in human history, and he became an instrument, a part of the storyline that brought us to what real truth is. So there are motivations for truth, and so anybody who's trying to make a point, trying to win an argument, trying to accomplish something, when they use the word truth, and like many of you, I'm fond of doing that. When I get in a debate with somebody, it's easy for me to say, well, the truth is, because that is how I see it. But in fact, it is how I see it. I thought about this in sort of in the nature of truth, whether you're talking about spiritual things or we're talking about political things, whether you're talking about personal things, is that for quite often there's more perception than reality to the issue of truth. If you have two people that are standing side by side and one of them says, isn't that a beautiful green plant? And the other one says, no, that's not a green plant, that's a gray plant. And the first one says, the truth is it's green. And the second one says, no, the truth is it's not green. The difference being that the second person has deficiencies in his rods and cones in his eyes, and he's colorblind. He's incapable of seeing green. So while the truth was, it was green, for him he saw no green, and so for the truth, it was not green. And you think, well, that's rather trite, preacher. Well, but that's a part of the challenge when dealing with things that you can neither prove nor disprove. And those are the places where you have the greatest argument. So truth is, there's a motivation for truth, and Pilate provides us by asking that question. The second point is that there are processes to truth. That is about how you derive at truth. So turn back a few pages in the Gospel of John to John chapter 8 and read verses 12 through 32, and then we will resume our study together. All right, so we don't have time to go into all the details of these conversations between Jesus and the people that are listening to him, both those who are the casual observers and his disciples. But he goes into some issues here where eventually he rolls around to one of the most often quoted passages about truth, and I would say the most abused quotes about truth in this very context. And that's where Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Like any good student of Scripture, and really any kind of document that you're studying, if you take a phrase or a sentence out of the context and you use it any way you want to, you've done an injustice to that expression because you've denied the very context in which it was set in. Because the whole challenge for Jesus in his ministry was to bring people to understand the truth. From the very beginning of the Gospel of John, where it was said the one who was coming he was a reflection of the Father, full of what? Grace and truth. Jesus said repeatedly, I tell you the truth. And yet people weren't willing to embrace and believe that truth. And so in this framework, when it comes to the issues of spiritual matter, how is a person supposed to know what in fact is truth? And Jesus distilled it down and really sort of two sub-statements in this about the process to truth. And number one is it can be determined by source material. And when we talk about source material, it's where people are gathering their information and their data to draw their conclusions about exactly what is true or what truth is. And Jesus said this, and this really frames that statement quite well. He says, if you continue in what? My word. If you continue in my word. Jesus introduced ideas and concepts that were foreign to virtually everyone. While he would cite Moses on the one hand, he would say, you've heard it said, but then I say to you. And so he was helping reframe people's thinking about what Old Testament truth and Mosaic truth and truth from Abraham and truth from all the prophets, and trying to frame it in a way that they could understand that he was the fulfillment and the satisfaction of all of that. But it was a struggle. And yet he said, so here's how you get to where you are to where truth actually is. He says, number one is your source of information. He said, and I have been providing that for you. If you continue what? In my word. So if you're looking for eternal truth or you're looking for spiritual truth, then the question is, where are you gathering your information and your data from? Are you reading philosophers? Are you reading Stoics? Exactly who are you reading? And Jesus said, I'm the words that I speak to you, they are spirit and they are what? They are truth and they are life. He says, so if you continue in my word, and so it's determined by source material, but it's also determined by what priorities. What's most important to us? In the first category in motivations about truth, we saw that in the various characters that Judas had a different motivation than Peter had, and than Annas had, and Caiaphas had, and Pilate had. They all had different motivations and different priorities. So even the words that they used and the questions they asked didn't reflect the same search or investigation or desire to know what in fact was true. So Jesus comes and says, in your trying to understand what's true, you begin with your source material, and he'll say, I'm providing that best source material for you. If you continue in my word, then he says your priorities are you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. You see, there's something in that process of truth that as long as we keep that truth at arm's length and say, okay, we're going to read the words, we're going to read the stories, we're going to look at the characters, the dates and the places, and we're going to try to intellectually process that down to whether we're to believe that or not. And Jesus said, it's never going to work. He says, because the words I speak to you, they're what? Life. He said, so you need to take my words, you need to embrace my words, you need to take my words into your life. You need to appropriate and apply those words. If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples. And what did it mean to continue in his word? He says, the things I say to you, go and do those. Don't just do as I say, do as I do. But you need to appropriate and apply those words if you're going to find out whether they're true or not. Simply by sitting back with your arms folded and looking at them and going, gee, is that true or is that not true? Well, I think it might be. It could be. Possibly it could be. Jesus says, no, you need to do something about those words. Continue in those words, and you will truly be my disciples, and you will what? You will know the truth. So it's only in actually doing the words, in committing yourself to be following the person of Jesus Christ, in who he was and what he taught. He says, and when you engage in that way, he said, you will what? You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So there's a motivation in truth Their processes is to truth. And then lastly, there are values in truth. Values in truth. So the next passage I want you to read is to go forward a few chapters to John chapter 14 and read the very first 6 verses, and we will resume our study together. This may be one of the familiar passages to you because this is the scene leading up to the arrest of Jesus. He's trying to prepare his disciples for the eventual, the inevitable. And he's trying to tell them that the arrangement they're currently living through with him is only a temporary arrangement. That he didn't come to stay and set up a kingdom. He came to accomplish the mission of the Father and his purpose. And so he said, I'm not going to be with you. I'm going to go away. And many other things. And they asked him, so where is it you're going to go? And he said, where am I going to go? You can't come. And how what is that? How can we know where you're going? How can we know what is truth? And it's in that framework that Jesus said to them, I am the way, I am the what? The truth, I am the life. And no one comes to the Father but by me. You know, he just finished talking about his relationship to the Father in this framework. He's trying to encourage them not to lose heart. He's trying to build this case that he's an expression of the Father and that God has all things under his control. And they're trying to process all that he's saying, and they're doing it from their world perspective, not necessarily from his. And quite often they created their own problems understanding rather than saying, well, just what did he say? And let's just let it mean what he says. And then that's when he comes around and he said in the simplest words, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And one of the problems they met with was trying to properly frame the words of Jesus so that they really meant what they meant. And so when you think about taking these words of Jesus and appropriating them into our context, and ask about the truth, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, and somebody could say, well, and what exactly does that mean? Because different truths actually have different values. To answer the question of Pilate, what is truth? That's a question about concept, what is truth. But when you're talking about the truth or a truth, then you can talk about any of a number of things. In our case, the question is what is true about COVID-19? What is true about the infection rate? What is true about prevention? What is true about care? What is true about all those things? So there's health-related truth that's not what Jesus was talking about here. And yet when we think about truths, we can think about these categorically. So we're left with saying we may not resolve the question of those truths about COVID-19. There's economically related truth. That is that, in this case, is businesses that shut down for several months and then they're trying to reopen. And in some places they're talking about reclosing them. You're talking about people that have no source of income, no way to pay their bills. And so for them, the truth is that if they can't do business, then they're out of business. But when Jesus said, I am the truth, that's not the truth that he was talking about. There's educationally related truth. And for those that have either children or grandchildren, they were pulled out of public school or private schools back in March. They did not finish the school year. And now nobody seems to know what's going to happen this fall. And so truth means something entirely different to you. If the children can't go back to school, then what does that mean for working parents? What does that mean for where the kids are in that whole business? And so the truth is sort of left out there in suspense. And so we're wondering what's going to happen in respect to educationally related truth. And then there's politically related truth. We're coming up on a few months to November 3rd and another presidential election. And what we're involved in right now, nationally with COVID and with social injustice and all that kind of stuff. There's just like this giant shadow looming over the election and who our next president is going to be. And so the question is, who's telling the truth? And how are you supposed to know that truth? But when Jesus said, I am the truth, was he talking about politically related truth? But then finally, there's the spiritually or eternally related truth, which is, now it's not to say the rest of those aren't important, because frankly, they're important to me. I hate things that are not true about this COVID stuff. And you know me, I read copiously. I posted a few things on Facebook. I have to rein in my anger because there's just so much stupidity that's in charge out there, and I just don't want to participate in the stupid. I understand the economics. I understand the educational stuff. I mean, my wife is homeschooling our grandson right now, and while we love him and she likes doing that, our taxes are paying for a public education for teachers to do that job, and so we understand that truth. And then politically, just don't get me started on that. We have no time to move on to other truths, but for all of us, we have to agree that behind it all, or over it all, or under it all, has to be the greatest truth issues, or the issues that have to do with that which is spiritual and that which is eternal. And so when Jesus comes in the midst of all the confusion about who he was and what he was there to do and how he's going about to do that he would say, if you want to know what's most true and most important about truth, he says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. So we have to recognize that all truth doesn't have the same value. But I don't know any truth that's more important than this truth, and that is whether we believe there's an eternity that we will face when this life is over, whether you're a victim of COVID or the victim of a car accident, or whether you live to be 115 years old and die of a ripe old age, is are we ready for that? And how can we know that truth going forward? Which brings me to, and this has been sort of around in my mind for some while, and hopefully I have the time to break this down for you. Because the issue for you and I, when we talk about in the framework of faith and what is true, in terms of source material, is the Bible true? In terms of deities, is God the real God, or is it Allah the real God, or is Buddha the real God? That for those of us that were raised in an evangelical background where we heard this at the youngest age and we embraced it as true, it's not posed a real issue for us. We've studied it, we've taught it, we've preached it, we believe it's true, we've encouraged other people, we've led a lot of people to pray these words of truth, we've seen lives that have been transformed. And it's easy for us to think that the road of truth and spirituality is one way, that it goes from a position of disbelief to belief, faith that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And yet I have learned in conversations with people that are strangers and people that are family members that road goes in both directions. Because there are people that move from not believing to believing, but then there are people that have moved from believing to not believing. And so this is how I want to frame this conversation at this point, because this is what's important to me in understanding both philosophically and spiritually the nature and the value of truth. I have a couple of books here. This one that I don't recall was recommended to me or whether I just saw it on Amazon and bought it, but it's entitled There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. Anthony Flew. He's now deceased, died in 2010. I went back and read the titles of his most famous works because he was perhaps the most prolific atheist writer of the 20th century. And I think I counted more than 30 books that he had written on the subject before he finally got around to writing this book. And as he got older, he was a staunch atheist. He was raised in a Methodist minister's home, but he rejected the faith of his parents and his fathers, and he embraced atheism, and he became an evangelist for that cause. But the older he got, he began to examine life in the world, and And he came to this place. He said, you know what? When I look at what is, I've not believed in creation. I have believed in evolution. But when I look at it closely, it's either too simple or too complex to have just happened without the hand of intelligent design. And so he moved from being an atheist to being a deist or a theist. And in his books, he says that in all the options, it seems to be the God of the Bible is the most likely God, but that's as far as he got. So that's the story of one account of a person that moved toward faith, but he never came to that place where he said that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. The other book that I'm still working through, I'm about halfway through as you can see, is a book that was loaned to me by my brother called The Preacher and I. It's autobiographical. Charles Porter is the author of this, and it's a well-written book. The guy is a good writer. He came to the forefront in the early part of the 20th century. He started out as not just an evangelical, but a fundamentalist Baptist preacher up in New England. And something happened along the way that he lost his faith. Now, unlike many, he didn't completely abandon the notion of God. He simply moved away from God being relevant. He didn't deny that God existed. As a matter of fact, he didn't give up the ministry. He just simply changed the place where he did. He became a Unitarian pastor. And he talks about that journey in there. And so as I'm reading this, and he talked about in the early part of the 20th century, he engaged in some highly publicized public debates with a high-profile fundamentalist Baptist preacher in New York, and there were thousands of people who attended these things, and he wrote about the debate and who judged the debates and what was said in the debates, and he's poking holes in what the fundamentalist Baptist preacher says, and he's promoting his own cause, and he gave me some insights into the whole business of truth and the struggle with truth and how we contextualize that in a spiritual framework that I had not really understood before. You see, for him and for many, it wasn't that they came to doubt the Bible, is that there were things that they believed about the Bible, that they began to doubt the things that they believed about the Bible. And when they began to doubt the things they believed about the Bible, then they essentially discarded the Bible itself. So if they read an account that included a miracle, simply because they had come to a position that scientifically miracles can't happen. Everything's bound by natural physical laws. And so miracles can't happen, therefore that miracle didn't happen. And for them, because that miracle didn't happen, that the event did not take place. There was no historical event in which that was contextualized. And so they pull back and they pull back and they pull back and they pull back. And yet for him, he continued to be, quote, a spiritual voice, taking on the uniform of somebody who says, well, there's basic truth out there. We need to teach people to be nice to each other and good to each other and to love each other. But God doesn't matter. He's not a part of the equation. And Jesus, in fact, never really existed. There's no person of Jesus. There's no salvation because there is no eternity. We all simply go into oblivion when all is said and done. I'm having issues now with anger in reading. I'm going to finish the book because I'm going to see where it all leads, but it just strikes me as strange. And so it leads me to, the last of these, and or cycling back around to our 2 Corinthians 13 passage where we read these words, "For we can do nothing against the truth, but only for the truth." And so this is where I've sort of arrived to, and it took me a long time to get here. Those that knew me in my youth, those that knew me in my younger adult years and even my median adult years, is that I was fond of a good fight. I'm not talking about a physical fight, but I'm talking about a good argument. Because I happen to believe that, what I believe was true. I happen to believe that the Bible was true. I happen to believe that the accounts were true. And when I encounter somebody that didn't believe those things and they'd want to minimize those things, then, I was okay engaging in a firm argument with them to try to prove them wrong. And somewhere along the way, and it's probably just an aging thing, to where I am just not interested in arguing with anybody about it. to me it's not worth the fight. Because here's what it all comes down to. And it does not matter what arena of truth we're talking about. We're not talking about even the value of those truths. Because either something is true or it's not true. It's true because it's true. If our definition was that truth is reality, then it's real. So therefore it's true. It doesn't require anybody to acknowledge it or to believe it or understand it or promote it. It has no bearing on it. Because it's true simply because it's real, it is true. Whether you're talking about physical things or economic things or financial things or educational things or philosophical things or spiritual things. Either heaven exists or heaven doesn't exist. Either hell exists or hell doesn't exist. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. Either Jesus was God in the flesh or Jesus was not God in the flesh. Either it was true or it wasn't true. If it is true, then according to Paul's words here, there's not anything you can do against that truth. My denouncing that truth has no bearing on that truth. It's true because it's true, not because I believe or don't believe. If I avow it, it doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it any more true. It's true because it is true. It's sort of another variation on it is what it is. And so a thing is by its nature what it is, whether I embrace it, believe it, reject it, or not. And Paul says we can do nothing against truth, but we can only do something for the truth. And I went back and looked at the Greek here, and it's not that we help truth at all. He said, we can't stop truth from being true, and we don't help truth be true, but we can promote truth. We can advance the cause. The word is huper. It's a preposition. And he said we can lift it up and say this is true, but we don't add to that truth. And so for the person who wants to say I don't believe the Bible, and I will say that's your right to not believe the Bible, or it's my right to believe the Bible. Which brings us down to the last of my stopping places here, and the image you'll see on your screen there is Blaise Pascal. I've talked about him in the past. He was a Frenchman, 17th century. He was a philosopher. He was a mathematician. He was a physicist. He was a Catholic theologian. And I didn't read about how he arrived at this, but as he was struggling with his own understanding, because we know that philosophy over time in every place has challenged people of faith how to frame that in a way for people who want to debate against them, and I guess in some ways I can thank him for the position that I've arrived to here, and that is that I have. Matter of fact, let me start reading this, but I'm not going to read much of it because you'll go, thank you. He writes this. He says, if there is a God, he is infinitely incomprehensible. Since having neither parts nor limits, he has no affinity to us. We are then incapable of knowing either what he is or if he is. God is or he is not. But to which side shall we incline? Reason can decide nothing here. There's an infinite chaos which separated us. A game is being played at the eternity of this infinite distance, where heads or tails will turn up. What will you wager? According to reason, you can not do neither the one thing nor the other. According to reason, you can defend neither of the propositions. Do not then reprove for error those who have made a choice, for you know nothing about it. No, but I blame them for having made not this choice, but a choice. For again, both he who chooses heads and he who chooses tails are equally at fault. They are both in the wrong. The true course is not to wager at all. I'm not going to read more. I'm going to come back and distill this down, because this is why I really got to thinking about this, especially in this context of the social justice stuff and where truth lies in this. That for those who to come out and stake this position and to say something particular matters is to protest as though somebody has said it doesn't matter. If somebody has come out and said it doesn't matter, then there's something to protest against. But if nobody has said it doesn't matter, then to come out and say it does matter is to give credibility to that which no one is stated. There is no truth to defend, no truth to promote. And in the the words of a friend of mine, he said to answer a lie is to give credence to a lie or lend credibility to a lie. So when Paul comes and talks about we can't do anything against the truth, then promoting an unjust cause because you're claiming there's been an injustice done when no injustice has been not done, you've created a problem that did not exist otherwise. And if I lost you on that, don't ask me to repeat it. I frankly cannot do that. So this is what Pascal said on this whole issue. And this holds true for individuals, whether it's you, whether it's your friends or your families, and this holds true for churches as well. Pascal said this. He said if you broke it down into like 4 different quadrants, he said there is that which is to gain and that which is to lose. And so when it comes to the issue of believing in Jesus, believing in God, believing in eternity, believing in the atonement, believing in the forgiveness of sin, believing in eternal life, believing in all those things, he said it comes down to what you stand to gain and what you stand to lose. And it was called Pascal's wager. And he said if believing all those things, in the end you find out you're wrong, you've gained nothing. But by the same token, if you've believed those things and you get to the end of the game and find you're wrong, he said you've lost nothing. He said, but to reject those things out of hand and to get to the end of the game and find out that you were right, you've lost nothing, you've gained nothing. But he said, if you were wrong, if you reject them, and you wager that those things are not true, and you get to the end of your life and discover that you were wrong, he said, you have lost everything. And so in his mind, and I know you can go online and read all the disputes and the rebuttals to this kind of thing, but I don't know how you would get around it. Because either it's true or it's not true. If it is true, then whether you believe it or reject it determines whether you gain everything or lose everything. So for you, the challenge is, where are you in that spiritual journey? Are you at that place where you hear the words of Jesus, He's the way, the truth, and the life? Are you at that place where you hear His words, you continue in His words, you become His disciples indeed, and you're knowing the truth and the truth is making you free? And are you at that place when Pilate asked the question, what is truth? You can say, oh, I know what truth is. I can't convince anybody else of that truth. That's on them. I will help them with the conversation. I will answer their questions. I will encourage them. I will hear their doubts and their concerns. I will pray for them. But at the end of the journey, they're going to have to decide for themselves whether it's true or whether it's not true. For those of us who've confessed our faith in Jesus Christ, not only do we celebrate the truth for ourselves, we celebrate the truth that when the game is over with, we have gained everything and we have lost nothing. But we get to celebrate it with other people who share that same conviction and that same faith. For the churches that are struggling out there with knowing whether they have a future because things aren't going the way they want them to go, you need to come back and ask the fundamental questions of what's the truth about the kingdom. And if it's the church of Jesus Christ, then what's wrong with it if it's not succeeding? What is the truth that you need to discover about yourself and that journey? I hope you understand the message today, and there's been a word in it for you, a word of encouragement, a word of enlightenment, a word perhaps encourage others. Let me lead us in prayer. Father, let me confess, this has been a struggle from the preparation of it to trying to get it delivered with all the distractions and the noises next door and outside, and then trying to walk mentally through this journey with people that I can't even see, but we'll dial in and we'll listen to these things or not listen to these things. So, Father, I just commit that to you. Father, it is my hope that people will have a reasoned faith. Not believe it just because we're told to believe it, but believe it because they've become convinced that it is true, that they have read, they've thought about it, they've weighed the evidence, and they've come to the decision that it's true. And it's more important to be true, and that the merits of that truth have more for them to gain than otherwise. Father, that this can be an instrument in their hands to help others that are perhaps struggling in their faith, to walk through that journey and to say, whatever decision we make, we will live with, and ultimately we will die with. And Father, it's my hope that people die in a relationship with Jesus Christ. So Father, help me as I continue this journey of finding out what you would have me to do and the grounds that we need to cover. And I thank you for the privilege that's mine to share this moment with family and friends. It's in Jesus' name we pray and for his sake. Amen. Let me say, for those of you who are continuing interested in our ministry as we're working on a website, we're not there yet. We're still waiting to receive our nonprofit status so that we can start, collecting for the people who want to support the ministry, that they give you the tax advantage there. If you'd like to go ahead and begin that process, then I'm putting my address up on the screen. You can make any checks payable to me and just put a notation on there for ministry, or if you want to give through Facebook or PayPal, however you want to do that, it would be very much appreciated. I will keep you posted as soon as we know the status, as soon as we get the website up. But thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and look forward to next time. God bless you, and have an awesome life.